Welcome, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with a new start of Kaiserreich. This is the new improved version. They've expanded the national focus trees and other elements for many other nations, Siam, Middle Africa, Goring's domain down here. Got a lot of that improved. I've been a little frustrated, quite honestly, with the two mods that I've been wanting to play, both Black Ice and Kaiserreich, because they were both having little problems and almost ready to release a new version, and now they've done so. Well, Kaiserreich has, so that's what we're going to be playing here. So, hope you'll want to come along with me. We're going to explore deeper. Okay, profits from legation cities. Following the 1926 intervention in China and the Treaty of Nanjing signed in November of that year, foreign trade was left to the richest cities of the coast under a joint control of world powers owning interest in China. The independence of these consortium of cities was guaranteed by 10 powers: Australasia, Austria, Canada, Flanders, Wallonia. That's interesting for Brussels or Belgium. Germany, Italy, Japan, National France, Russia, and USA. Foreign investments and legation cities themselves flourish not only through foreign trade, but also thanks to smuggling into the Ostasian and Qing territories. Despite the ongoing economic crisis, our investment in legation cities are still bringing us grand profits. Okay. The Constitution of the Kaiser, or the German Kaiserreich. After the crushing defeat of the Second French Empire by forces of the North German Federation, our Constitution was signed in 1871 by representatives of the North German Federation and the 4 southern German states. This constitution put the southern German states under the influence of the Northern German Federation, thus giving the enlarged entity a new identity as the Deutsches Reich. According to the Constitution, the empire was a federation of 25 German states. The Präsidentum, sorry, I'm butchering this German, I know. The emperor was held by the King of Prussia, who had the title of German Emperor. German Emperor appointed the Chancellor, the head of the German government, the chairman of the Bundesrat, Council of Representatives of the German states. Laws were enacted by the Bundesrat and the Bundestag, Imperial Diet, elected by male Germans above the age of 25. However, excuse me, it is the Emperor, not the Bundesrat or the Bundestag, who leads the power in the German Empire. With an option to dissolve the Reichstag on a whim, it is clear that the main political power in the German Empire rests not with the Reichstag elected by the people, but in the hands of the non-elected German Emperor. Another issue of the Prussian three-class voting system, which has remained unchanged since 1849, over 60 years after the founding of the Kaiserreich. Liberals and the Social Democrats are growing increasingly disgruntled with the status of things, and the Constitution may see large revisions in the next few years. Okay. For those of you who don't know, because we're calling it, this is called Kaiserreich. Kaiser is just the German corruption, as I would call it, of Caesar. Now that may be the English corruption of Cesare, I don't know. As in, named after the person's name, Gaius Julius Caesar. not a title but a name, where emperor is a changing, if you will, from the term imperator, which was a title. So the Russians changed it to Tsar, Germans to Kaiser, English to Caesar. So just to give you a little background, this is all, shall we say, because it had been the Kaiser of the Holy Roman Empire. Note the term Roman. That's where, going way back, Germany, or not Germany, Europe gets the legitimacy of empires from Rome. You have to, most modern people don't really understand this. Many of you do because you are history nerds like myself, but a lot of people don't understand the way government really sort of works traditionally, ongoing. You needed a form of legitimacy to be something other than a dictator. And a dictator also comes from Rome. They were generally there, a dictator for, generally speaking, for a year, or for a specific crisis. But a dictator lives or dies, often literally, on his success, his performing well. Where if you have other forms of legitimacy, you can go, oh, this was a mistake, or oh, this was bad times, or something bad happened to us. And the people will go, yeah, okay, you're at least partially human. This was something bad. We'll rally around you because you have a form of legitimacy in your government. So to get that legitimacy, you can go way back to kings and queens. And in European Christian context, that is something that is anointed by God. So you've gone through and gotten the church's blessing, so that starts falling apart more as you move away from Catholicism. But to be an emperor and to have an empire that is legitimate, and an empire really is a multi-national, multi-nation, maybe even multi-state, depending on how you look at it. Because a nation is like the German nation. The state, and I know to Americans they think of states, and a lot of people think of it as a province term. But a state is a government. So you can have the Tuscan state, within the general region of Italy, but then you can have the Italian nation, all of the Italians. And so now, of course, you can have a nation state, a nation, or a state that takes up the complete nation of an ethnic group that's coherently of one, culture, viewpoint. Maybe not everybody of that culture is within it, but a great majority of that. So to have an empire and have it legitimized, these empires were in existence until 1918. Okay, you have to think about, obviously we're playing Kaiserreich here, so the empires continue in existence, but you have the Russian Empire with the Tsar is coming from Roman legitimacy via its east, the Roman Empire in the east, which sort of morphs into Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire. The Russians are taking that legitimacy and moving it, particularly once it's fallen to the Muslims, moving it to their empire. In Europe, coming out of oh boy, Charlemagne, and that's in English Charles the Great, is the first Holy Roman Emperor. They're trying to now put the stamp of Christianity on the Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Emperor, when it started, Empire, did have parts of Italy, but never had Rome. But did have, parts of Gaul, France, if you will, other parts of the Roman Empire. And that legitimacy that you see moves through the European context all the way until 1918. So this is something that is often overlooked in modern socialist education, and that I'm putting in, I believe, most of Europe and definitely in America today, that they dismiss or even just not even acknowledge its existence. And by doing that, they are purely looking at wanting to look at forms of government that doesn't have any form of legitimacy other than a claimed majority rule of democracy. And you hear people constantly today talk about protecting of democracy, and most of that comes out of World War II's propaganda, some of it a little bit of World War I, but democracy. And you have, if you will, to some degree, the three gods of shall we say, of political thought in the West: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. That they, when you take a philosophy class, they still hold them up to be a founding elements of European, Western, however you want to look at it, thought. And one thing that all three of them said very clearly was that democracy was the worst possible form of government they could conceive of. Okay? So people who set up our Western way of thinking thought democracy was the worst possible form of government that they could conceive of. And particularly, I know Plato did, and if you don't know this, Socrates, to the best of our knowledge, never wrote a single word. He was a talker, sort of like myself. Unfortunately, we can record my talking here. But Plato was his teacher. Some of the stuff we believe he faithfully took down, the Socrates dialogues and monologues. Basically, all of Plato's writing was, that which survives to us today, is in Socrates' mouth. They put him in his words, whether we believe a bunch of it was written after his death. But he is definitely a student of Socrates. And basically a student of Plato is Aristotle. So sort of three generations there that create Western thought. Now, I once said to someone who thought of himself as fairly educated, but still going through the education process, still a student, that these three people thought that the worst possible form of government. He says, but they would have no other government. We go, no. They hated democracy. They think democracy is the worst possible form of government, to the point that a democracy voted to put Socrates to death. Okay, they voted in in Athens Parliament to put Socrates to death for corrupting the youth. That was the charge, because he was corrupting the youth. Now, and you can look at read the trial of Socrates and other documents that survive to this day. Now, and Socrates really didn't talk about forms of government, but he talked about philosophies of the government, shall we say, where Plato and Aristotle, they talked about forms of government. And particularly Aristotle thought that representation within the government was part of the fundamentally best form of government you could have. And so representation is something often done through voting, but that is different than a democracy. I know I started Kaiserreich here, and I've gotten into this. Hello, Django. How you doing? No, not in America. In America, they are pushing majority rule. They are discrediting the American founders. They are trying to discredit the Constitution as, 3/5 of a human black people were, so it's a racist, white supremacist document that must go. No. They are trying to do majority rules for demagoguery to rule. That is the current move within the United States. And the fundamental difference between, say, a republic or some other form of government and a democracy is that within a republic it has laws, and the laws which not only govern the people but also govern the government, that limit governmental power. And these, which really transformed with the Roman Republic, was under the Roman Republic, they had to post the laws basically on like clay or stone tablets on the side of the building so everybody could read it. And now this worked very effective when Rome was primarily Rome, the city, and parts of the Italian peninsula. Once it becomes an empire, we can see all the mad emperors and everything else. But while it was a republic with a constitution, with a limiting form of government, that Plato wanted government by the elites, that he thought he could somehow divine men's souls, that metaphorically would either have, the guys at the top would have the souls of gold. Not that he thought they were real gold in their souls, but just those were the types, somehow to figure out who those people were. And the actual sort of doers of the government, particularly the military, would be the souls of silver, and then sort of everybody else in his republic. And it was a republic because you might very well have different elements to choose who is the best leader, and that type of thing, but that was only amongst those souls of gold. The souls of clay or whoever wouldn't have any sort of democratic say within Plato's ideal republic, where Aristotle believed in a mixed form of government, which could have a monarch, but generally was an aristocracy. That was a defined thing, that also had a democratic representation within it of the groups of people within society. They often looked at them as tribes, which may very literally be tribes within the Greek community, or they could be sort of like what we would call them estates. Could be like the manufacturing estate, the farming estate, the shipping estate. You're looking at, classical Greek world type things, so that each of these groups would elect representatives. So the farmers would elect a group of representatives, the manufacturers would elect a group of representatives, and that type of thing. And that would give, these group of people. Now, I'm sure today, if we were to start talking about these three gentlemen, people would call them out as being racist because they held slaves. They believed in slavery. I don't know how fundamental, particularly, all three of them believed in slavery, but they lived within a world of slavery. Now, of course, the reason they think they were slaves is, to an American, a slave is a person who has black skin and is from Africa, where traditionally within the world history, and still to this day, because some people believe there is more slavery going on now of various types than there was before the American Civil War within America. Not within the whole world, but within America. There's more slavery going on today. But slavery was traditionally not based on your ethnicity, was not traditionally black Africans. They were traditionally defeated enemies, or sort of an underclass that developed. So it wasn't racially based, because one Gaulish city could defeat another Gaulish city and take a bunch of the defeated people as slaves. It wasn't necessarily going long distances to some foreign cultural land to take slaves. It could just simply be people one valley over that would become slaves. And like the classic, the Helots of Sparta, to the best of my knowledge, they were basically all ethnically Greek. They just weren't the Spartan ruling elite. Okay, so this gets back, bringing it back now, is to legitimacy in government. If you are a dictator, your legitimacy rests solely on your ability to perform. If, like the assassination of President Kerensky, if you're not doing well in your government, you are no longer legitimate. If you're democratic, your legitimacy is based upon the majority. Even if, yes, it's democratic representation within a constitutional form, it's still basing it on support of the majority, not being right, not being something else. Where with a Kaiser or a king, it is based on the legitimacy of tradition over time, all coming out of Rome and before, mixed in with Christianity, the Holy Roman Empire. I think we've got a new subscriber. Good to see you there. Project 666, I believe that was. And so that is your basing on legitimacy. Now, with Kerensky just being shot, and yes, I am bringing it back to the game. While on the way to the Senate, the assailant was taken down by the police, but the goals and the intentions of the attack are unknown, despite his massive unpopularity amongst the Russian people due to his botched land reform and ineffective rule. Kerensky was nevertheless able to hold the country together for years, and his death has thrown Russia into chaos. The senators are already discussing a possible replacement to Kerensky. New coalitions are being formed both between the left and the right, while military men like Denikin, who I think is okay, considering things. Wrangel, who I'm a big fan of, and Kornilov, who I really don't know, but probably read about him and reading about the other men, are just one step away from intervening to dissolve democracy and save Mother Russia. Okay, so this gets back to this lecture on legitimacy in government. Let's use an example. The British monarchy. People believe that it's powerless now, and it may be. Depends on how you want to view it. But go back to 1940, 4 years after this time period, and you had a relatively, for Europe, stable form of government with a parliamentary monarchy within Britain. You have a collapse in both public as well as, I know I should be doing this black ice, but this is good enough here, public confidence as well as in governmental confidence in the top leadership of the country in Britain. So Chamberlain, who very well may be a very good statesman, and I do believe he was, and I don't know in detail, but a rather good prime minister of a peacetime Britain, not of a mobilizing for war Britain, but of a peacetime, let's keep things going. He was not a bad government leader, but he was not a war leader. And so their system by this time recognizes that probably the greatest expert on government is not the monarch, who just, whether you believe he's picked by God or you believe that he is, picked by birth, somebody who is bred from elites, or you just believe that, hey, it's random genes, they get together, maybe he's a little smarter, maybe he's a little dumber than average people, but he's been given a really good education, and monarchs can be given a really good education. But the idea is that they give this establishment of authority, of legitimacy, and so you have this crisis in government. Well, okay, what do? We're at war, France is falling, the monarch picks the new leader based upon likely candidates, who's going to do well. Now it's sort of presented to him as being Churchill, and they accept. But I would believe George would have gone if Chamberlain picked somebody completely unsuitable, or Parliament, whatever. He picks Churchill. Churchill steps in. With the assassination of Kerensky here is, you don't have a clear established line of authority in this crisis to move on with an assassination. You don't have a monarchical sort of system that goes, oh, no, the king's dead. Well, let's get his son, his daughter, his nephew, his somebody. Hello, Dimitra? Sorry, I'm butchering your name. You don't get, some family member to just step in to replace him that's a clear line of succession, because Kerensky, who of course is noted for coming out with the Menshevik government when overthrowing the Tsar, doesn't have a line of tradition, a clearly accepted constitution that, the vice president, whoever it may be, if there is even a vice president in their form of government, which I don't believe is a real form of government, they're supposing is one that they're making up, if there is not Der Metzel. Okay, that's easy. Now you break it up. Der Metzel. Der Metzel. Der Metzel. So you don't have a ongoing tradition, so you now have different power groups that are, because they talk about the right and the left here, you have a collapse in lines of succession, you have everyone trying to grab for it. That is a problem with either a dictator who is there which he's sort of sounding like this, because he's successful, or with a democracy, but you don't have a clear cohesion of political thought. Is it going to be a communist, a syndicalist, or is it going to be a czarist, or something in between? And you don't have national consensus. So when you have these crises, and every nation will have them eventually. In the U.S., the last president who was shot was Ronald Reagan, and if it wasn't for modern medical abilities, he would have been dead. I mean, there's no question about this. So we're going to move on, try to get some playing in. This is what I find is fascinating so far about Kaiserreich, because I played a little bit of, through 37 or something before. Is dealing with the ancient regimes, the ancient regimes of the world conflicting with the neo-regimes on something of an equal footing. The Commune of France, the Italian Federation, or I guess more the Socialist Republic of Italy. Okay. George the Fifth, last king of Great Britain and Ireland, who have ruled the home islands themselves, has passed while in exile in Canada. The first Windsor king, his reign shall be remembered with sorrow and sadness. During Britain lost both the Weltercraig and its homeland. The crown was inherited by Edward, Prince of Wales, now styling himself as Edward VIII. King Edward is a vengeful and ambitious man, not on good terms with Prime Minister Mackenzie King. He lives on the goal of avenging his father and reconquering the British Isles, thus quite popular among the British exiles in Canada. Okay, so that's setting up a Canadian attack on Britain. I wonder, does this mod have the ability to put a German king on the throne, or particularly the King of Bavaria, because he was a legitimate claimant to the English throne, probably more legitimate than Edward. Okay, with the stagnation of our economy, the worsening conditions of our citizens during 1935, our government has decided that in order to restart our economic, we need additional cash, only available through options for mass sufficient. Okay, so we're going to get all of our money now for a year from that. Yeah, no, I'm not going exclusively to Twitch, but I want to build up my Twitch following base so that if things go really wrong, okay, see you when you get back, Django. I can continue on Twitch, because Twitch is moving more and more into being able to do pre-recorded stuff. I hope it's good connection for you. And I'm streaming it at hopefully good quality. Okay, Black Monday. On the 3rd of February 1936, the Berlin Stock Exchange stopped sinking. It plunged, fueled by the instability of the market panic. Selling erupted as soon as the stock market opened on Monday morning. It took well into the night for the teleprinters to stop spreading out the results of what became known as Black Monday. When the results had been analyzed, it was clear the situation had not only got worse. The shock of the unpleasant economic catastrophe will no doubt be felt over the entire world. The German Golden Age has ended for now, at least. Okay, so this is Black Monday. They're taking it from Black Friday in the United States. I know I've mentioned this a bit before. Black Friday happens because of sort of two joint events together, but two different factors. One, and I'll keep this much briefer than I did about the talk on legitimacy, they built a railroad down basically to Miami. Before that, 80-90% of the state of Florida lived up in this part of the state. This was there had been almost no connecting roads. It was just ports and little small towns down here. They moved. They put a railroad down. Eventually, bridges down to the Keys. And what the elites in America, particularly in and around New York City, but also Boston, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, realized, oh, good, glad that it's been educational before, realized that they could get on a train and get down to Florida in the winter, because this was a time, before, heated cars. Well, a heated car was a train car or something, and only the people who could afford a train car could have their own car, and that wasn't getting them around the city. So the elites could move down to Miami during the winter. So this really started this going. Come to the 1920s, 1930s, and again, as I mentioned before, you can watch the movie Coconuts, starring the Marx Brothers, their first movie. For what it was, it's good. I'm a big Marx Brothers fan. So there was massive amounts of land speculation. 2 hurricanes hit, not quite like close succession as in hours or days, but just a few years apart. And one of them, I forget whether it was the first or the second one, a lot of people had never really been in an intense hurricane, and they hadn't really understood what a hurricane was. When hurricanes often come up to this part of the United States, they're often no longer hurricanes. They're now tropical storms, meaning they don't have an eye in the center of them. And even then, people don't really know. Now, when a hurricane is coming to you, it's slowly building up, because like a lot of these hurricanes that are recently been hitting the U.S. and the Caribbean in the last month or so, a lot of them, if you look at it, they're moving at like 7-9 miles an hour across the land. Now, it's like 100 miles an hour of wind swirling around, but you can almost outrun it, literally. If you can run long enough, you can definitely outsail it in modern powered ships. But back then, they did not have a good early warning system. Well, looks like we have a new subscriber. Thank you, Der Metzel. Great. They didn't have early warning systems, but as to what hurricane, days before, but you obviously have this building up, so people would take shelter in what they could, and a lot of massive amounts of people would move down here. And if you know anything about this part of the U.S., it's something like, I don't know, like there's no natural feature above 12 feet above the sea level, or some height like that. There's no like 30-foot mountains, or hills that are natural. You can build them today with modern tractors and dirt moving machinery. But it was something like that. And maybe it's 25 feet. I don't know. But it's really flat. And so and the big thing was obviously along the coast, because that's where, hey, the beaches are, and it's fun because inside is swampy and ugly, and you don't really want to go there until Disney starts transforming the land later on in Disney World and other theme parks end up showing up. But most everyone wants to be on the coast, so they're not used to, they're used to maybe people knowing storms, but they're not used to hurricanes. So it really gets really big. Comes over the eye. It's like perfect, peaceful, placid. Everybody comes outside, and then boom, and this I think hits sort of right over the Keys, and some of, I don't know specifically Miami, but I think literally like 10,000 people die in this storm, and it's not even well documented. And this is all in like 37 or so, late 37, summer, I don't know, but the exact time. But this hits, and people are outside, and it goes from like 0 to 100 miles an hour in wind, and it just bam, as opposed to the slowly building up. So people are outside, and they're picked up by the storm, or things are just slammed into them. You can see, I saw recently like a coconut tree, or just some palm tree that had a huge, like, 2x4 spiky that had broken off from the building, just shoved right through it. Somehow it hit it like a spike, and it had done by the wind. So people are just hit by this debris and killed, and without any warning. And these are a lot of northeastern Americans. These weren't a lot of people. They didn't know what to expect. And so this land speculation, and it hit people not just here, but it hit people everywhere else that had been speculating in Florida land. That, in combination with buying stocks on a margin, you used to, before Black Friday, be able to come in and go, hey, the stock market, which was just going up and going up and going up. Individual stocks might go down a bit, but it was just going up because everybody was pouring money into it. The value of the stock became unseparated from what, shall we say, the dividends of the stock. The idea of a stock is that you own a percentage of a company, and Alexandra Large, thanks for following the channel. And so you would buy this stock on a margin, it's going up, and that's a percentage. Like, you'd put in like 20% of the stock, you'd buy it. And so the value of the idea is, so if the company's making money, you get a percent of the money that the stock is being made. But with the value, it's going up, so people are buying it, so they buy it as speculation, not as, I'm going to make $1 a month or $100 a month for each share of stock. You're buying it because the value of the stock itself is going up to resell it. So it becomes unconnected with the actual value of the company that the stock represents. And people were buying it on the margin. So, like I was saying, that's like a percent of it. So you didn't necessarily have all the money, and they didn't have bankruptcy laws like we do today. So that you had the situation where you had to pay it off. So when the stock market collapses, or starts to collapse, starts to go down, people can't cover their margins. So this collapses the U.S. stock market. I don't see in any of their talks why it's particularly that you're having this reason for Black Monday that it goes into panic. They don't explain it well, and this is a short thing, but it's sort of unique to the U.S. as to why that happened. It can't happen today because we don't allow people to buy stocks on margin. If it's a $10 stock, for each share you got to put $10 down. So if the stock goes down, it still lose half its value. You still have $5. So it's not a panic situation, and it's not a collapse of the economy situation. Okay, so let's get going. So we have the state of the economy, national focus complete. We have run on the banks. German citizens, panicked by the collapse of the Berlin stock market, are rushing to make bank runs to withdraw their assets. The banks cannot afford to give out such sums, and many are in danger of collapse. Many are clamoring for immediate government intervention to stabilize this unprecedented financial crisis. Okay, we can close the banks temporarily. Massive hit to political power. Guarantee the holdings of private individuals. That means basically your speculators, your other types aren't going to be, or even the bank might collapse, but someone's going to be able to get their money, their individual monies out, or do nothing, which is worse. So we're going to take the least bad option politically, political power speaking, and guarantee private individuals. Well, the vast colonial empire, I would presume, especially as they're talking about trade with China, that it can be a revenue generating source. The idea of colonial empires had been for autocracies. I have trouble saying that word. That basically means a closed economy that is stable and big enough self-funding, meaning the colonies provide resources that get sent back to, and it doesn't have to be this model, but with the colonies it generally is. They'll provide resources that get sent back to manufacturing centers. The manufacturing centers produce a lot of cheap goods. Some of it goes to the sort of home country, but a lot of it gets sold back to the people in other parts of the world. And so, like, if you look at Gandhi and his protest, he in India they produced a lot of cotton, but it was illegal to spin cotton into thread and then to weave it into cloth under the British Empire, because what they wanted to have happen is to have that cotton grown in India, picked, baled up, shipped to Britain, and then put in modern industrial factories, spin it into thread and weave it into cloth, and then sell that cloth back to India. And something that can be done and sold to poor people in India because it's very cheaply made in Britain through its system. So it was illegal. So Gandhi was defying British law by spinning some of his own thread and by hand weaving it into cloth. So this was part of the protest. And now the problem with that whole system is that it's based on protecting labor of inefficiencies, of hand-loomed weavers, that they're never going to keep up with greater demand. But it was an act of defiance, and I think Gandhi knew that, wasn't it? Decline in the war industry. As I've talked about before, war industries, if you have cold wars or threats of wars, war industries do very well during peacetime. It was the post-World War I war industry did so badly because there was this disarmaments movement, which I've talked about before. Wounded veterans, yeah, that could eat up a lot of funds if you're taking care of them better than the Weimar Republic. Yes, we need to keep political reserve, but we're going through this trauma time here, and it is bad. So, downfall and stability. Electoral gridlock in France. The Commune of France is the world's leading syndicalist nation, united as a federation of communes directed by the Committee de Salut Public, the chief executive. Ever since its inception, however, the Second Commune has no uniformity in its policies. Numerous factions rose, each with their own ideas, of which the path France should take. At the time as the time for revenge against Germany and the world revolution closes in, the CGT election in 1936 is set to be very important. It was so important, in fact, that none of the four factions could acquire a majority, much like before the election. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do here is end this episode, but none of you go away because I'm not ending the stream. I'm going to make several episodes in a row here. So hang on just a second here. Thanks everyone on YouTube for watching. Really do appreciate it. And if you would, please like the video. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to me. You can also subscribe over or follow over on Twitch. And of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, questions, corrections. I love hearing that. See you next time for more. Part